A police officer was patrolling a snowy mountain road when suddenly a battered German Shepherd limped into his path and blocked his car. The dog's fur was matted with blood, his paw dragging in the ice, yet his amber eyes burned with purpose. He didn't beg for food. He didn't growl. He simply turned and walked into the dark forest, looking back as if to say, "Follow me." The officer obeyed, and what he found hidden among the pines was a broken veteran trapped in the shadows of war, his life hanging by a thread. What happened next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The wind cut like razors through the pines that night in Aspen Ridge, Colorado, a remote town nestled high in the Rockies where snow buried everything under silence. The roads were slick with ice and untouched powder, winding between towering trees like ghost trails. Just 15 seconds into that stretch of highway, all that could be heard was the hum of a patrol engine and the muffled thunk of snow hitting steel. The sky hung heavy, black and swollen with more snow yet to fall. Ethan Rhodes, 35, sat behind the wheel of the department-issued Ford Explorer, scanning the bend ahead with a seasoned eye. Tall and broad-shouldered, Ethan had the quiet presence of someone who'd lived more than he'd said. His dark brown hair was cropped short with strands of premature gray at his temples. A faint scar trailed from his left eyebrow to cheekbone, barely visible in the patrol car's glow. His eyes, storm gray and calm, rarely missed movement. They had once scanned desert valleys through a sniper's scope in Kandahar, and now they watched mountain roads in a place that promised peace, but often whispered otherwise. Before he was Officer Rhodes, he'd been Sergeant Rhodes, 10th Mountain Division. 2 tours overseas, one hearing loss scare from an IED, and a medal he never talked about. After the war, he'd chosen Aspen Ridge for its quiet, but on nights like this, when snow made the world too still, the quiet crawled under his skin. He sipped lukewarm coffee from a metal thermos, eyes flicking to the rear view, then back to the road. Timberline Pass was always a trouble spot for wildlife crossing. Then, suddenly movement. His foot eased the brake. The SUV slowed. A figure stood directly in the center of the road, barely visible against the flurries. At first, he thought it was a coyote, maybe a lost dog, but as the headlights fanned wider through the snow, Ethan froze. Standing in the beam of light was a German Shepherd, large, roughly 10 years old by the look of his sunken frame. His coat, once regal sable, was clumped with snow, smeared with old blood, and speckled with road salt and ash. One ear stood alert, the other bent awkwardly sideways as if crushed years ago and never healed right. His hind leg shook, and every breath formed a trembling fog in the frigid air. But he stood steady, silent, proud, his ribs pressed sharp beneath his skin. His amber eyes locked with Ethan's. No barking, no whimpering, no retreat, just a stare. Then the dog took a step forward, paw dragging in the snow. Ethan could see the wound now, something raw and recent, likely a deep gash along his side. "Jesus," Ethan whispered, heart tightening. He turned off the engine. The silence returned, louder than before. Ethan stepped out of the vehicle slowly. The moment his boots hit the snow, the wind bit through his coat. He pulled his scarf higher, hand instinctively near his radio, but didn't reach for it. The dog didn't flinch. "Hey, buddy," Ethan said gently, voice low. "What are you doing out here?" He knelt down slightly, not getting too close, keeping his posture calm. Years in both war and law enforcement had taught him to read body language better than words. This dog wasn't just lost. He wasn't begging. He wasn't defending territory. He was asking. Ethan had seen those eyes before. Once, back in Helmand, when a military canine had sat beside a wounded soldier and refused to leave, even under fire. This look was the same. "Where's your handler?" he asked softly. "Where's your home?" The German Shepherd limped forward, then turned his head toward the tree line. Snow fell harder now, the wind whistling through pines like distant sirens. The dog took another step, then looked back. Ethan felt something deep in his chest, intuition, or maybe memory, nudge him forward. He reached up, pressed the button on his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I've got an injured German Shepherd on Timberline Pass. No collar, not aggressive, he's signaling. I'm going to follow on foot for a few hundred yards just in case there's someone else out here." The voice on the other end crackled. "Copy that, Unit 4. Keep us posted." Ethan clicked off, pulled his flashlight from his vest, and glanced at the tree line again. The dog had already begun limping forward, tail low but not tucked. Determined. Ethan hesitated, looked back at his cruiser, a warm seat, safety, protocol. Then he turned and followed the dog into the forest. The forest swallowed them. Beyond the bend of the road, Aspen Ridge disappeared into a haze of snow and pine. The trees thickened, crowding in with tall, hunched shoulders, their branches draped in snow like funeral veils. What little moonlight had pierced through earlier was now gone, hidden behind swollen storm clouds. In its place was the narrow beam of Ethan's flashlight, swinging with each careful step. The dog limped ahead, his paws barely making a sound on the snow-draped earth. Every few paces, he'd stop, glance over his shoulder with those deep amber eyes, and wait until Ethan closed the gap. Then, with a nod so subtle it felt human, he'd press forward again. He didn't whine, didn't bark. His pace was slow but sure, like he knew exactly where he was going and had no intention of being rushed. Ethan tightened the straps on his jacket, drawing warmth close. His boots sank deep with each step, the snow already over ankle height. The cold crept up through the soles and bit at his calves. Still, he pressed on. He raised his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. I'm following a German Shepherd into Timberline Woods, about 100 yards northeast of the last mile marker. Visibility's bad, trail unclear, possible search and rescue situation. Over." Only static answered. He clicked the mic again. "Dispatch, come in." Nothing but a low hiss. Ethan lowered the radio, jaw clenched. The treetops and the ridge likely blocked the signal. Not unusual out here, but unsettling when you were alone in the dark with nothing but a dog and a gut feeling. And he wasn't just alone, he was alone in a familiar kind of silence. It wasn't the kind found in small towns or deserted highways, it was the silence of memory, of something lost. His breathing slowed. This night, it reminded him too much of another. Corporal James Keller, his closest friend from his second deployment, had disappeared during a night patrol in a snowstorm in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. One minute they were walking side by side, boots crunching rock, the next, whiteout. When the snow cleared, Keller was gone. No sound, no footprints, just the weight of absence and the echo of Ethan's own name, whispered by the wind. They never found his body. The Army ruled it death by exposure. Ethan never accepted that. He believed Keller had survived longer than they knew, held on, waited until he couldn't. Tonight's storm had that same energy, that same hush that came before a scream. His gut coiled as he stepped over a fallen log and pressed deeper into the forest. The shepherd suddenly stopped at a small break in the trees. Ethan caught up and paused beside him. A narrow, sunken trail led off the main path, barely visible beneath the snow. It snaked down a hill where the land dipped, forming a kind of natural bowl. Pines surrounded the edges, their trunks arching inward like teeth. The dog took a step down the trail, then paused again. "You want me to keep going?" Ethan asked, breath clouding around his words. The dog turned slightly, nose toward the trail. Then he continued. Ethan followed. Halfway down the incline, Ethan slipped. His boot caught a root hidden beneath the snow and sent him sprawling. He hit the ground with a grunt, snow seeping through the knees of his pants. Before he could rise, the shepherd circled back and stood nearby, watching silently. "You're not going to help me up?" Ethan muttered, sitting up with a grimace. The dog lowered his head slightly, almost like a shrug. Ethan chuckled bitterly. "You've got attitude." He climbed to his feet, brushed off his jacket, and looked around. They were deeper now, the slope gentler as it leveled into a small clearing. He spotted something then, a trail of disturbed snow just ahead. Small prints, human-sized. Ethan knelt and examined them, barely visible but fresh. The snow hadn't had time to refill the indentations. Someone had been through here not long ago. The shepherd stood behind him, ears twitching. "You were leading me to this," Ethan whispered. He looked up. The prints vanished into another dense patch of trees. The forest felt tighter now, the silence thicker. A distant branch snapped. Ethan's hand dropped instinctively to the holster at his hip. The dog, too, stilled. But nothing moved. Ethan exhaled slowly and stood again. The wind had picked up, snow falling in waves now. Still no radio signal. His fingers were starting to go numb. "All right, partner," he said to the shepherd. "Lead the way." The dog moved forward again, steady but slower. Ethan noticed the limp had worsened. The blood matting his fur had darkened. "You're hurting," Ethan murmured, "but you're not stopping." He wondered if the dog had once belonged to someone, a handler, a partner, maybe even the very person whose prints they were following. If so, the dog wasn't just guiding Ethan, he was going home. As they pushed deeper, a soft orange glow became visible between the trees, a flicker barely noticeable through the snow. Ethan tensed. The dog stopped and sat, chest heaving from the effort, but still alert. Ethan raised his flashlight and scanned the area. There, in a hollow between three leaning pines, was a burn barrel. Faint smoke drifted up from its rusted mouth, the glow of embers still alive inside. Someone had been here, maybe still was. Ethan approached cautiously, keeping his light low. Beside the barrel he found a canvas backpack, torn at one strap. Empty water bottles lay scattered in the snow, along with a torn wool blanket. No blood, no signs of a fight, just the desperation of survival. The dog sat beside the barrel, head low, eyes fixed on something only he could see. Ethan stepped back and looked around. The tracks picked up again, veering east. The shepherd didn't wait for a command. He got up, limped toward the prints, then paused. Waited. Ethan followed, heart pounding louder now, not from exertion, but anticipation, the kind that came before contact, before a rescue, or a discovery. He didn't know what he was walking toward, but the dog did, and so Ethan followed. The trees thinned just enough to reveal the structure. Ethan stopped beside the dog, his breath visible in the freezing air. Nestled between a crooked pine and a moss-covered boulder sat a small wooden cabin, its roof sagging under the weight of snow, its front steps partially buried. The boards were weathered and bleached gray, the windows fogged over and rimmed with frost. If the smoke barrel had been a whisper, this cabin was a shout. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. The German shepherd, now quietly referred to in Ethan's mind as Shadow, sat without prompting at the edge of the clearing. His chest rose and fell in shallow rhythm, one front paw tucked close, the limp more pronounced now. Yet his eyes remained alert, locked on the door of the cabin as if waiting for it to open itself. Ethan approached slowly, one hand hovering near his sidearm, the other adjusting the beam of his flashlight. He stepped onto the porch, boards groaning under his weight. Through the slats of the window, only darkness. He knocked twice, sharp and loud. "Police, is anyone inside?" No answer. Another knock. "This is Officer Ethan Rhodes of Aspen Ridge PD. If you're hurt or need assistance, I'm here to help." Still silence. Ethan tested the handle. Unlocked. The door creaked open on the rusted hinges. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Sweat, old smoke, something sour, like wet clothes left too long in a cold room. The air inside was heavy, thick with damp. The flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a cramped single-room interior. A narrow cot sat against the far wall, a wood-burning stove in the corner, cold now and blackened. Boxes and clothes littered the floor. On the wall hung an old military coat, faded camo green, with one torn sleeve. Then Ethan saw him. Curled in the far corner beneath a ratty blanket, rocking gently, was a man. He was maybe in his early 40s, though the lines etched across his face made him seem older. Thomas Hale, Ethan would later learn, was a former Army combat engineer who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Now he looked like a man halfway between 2 worlds. His face was gaunt, beard uneven and peppered with gray. His hair, dark and tangled, stuck to his forehead with sweat. His eyes, wild and sunken, darted up the moment Ethan stepped into view. Thomas lunged backward, striking the wall with a cry. "Stay back! You stay the hell away!" Ethan froze. "Easy, easy. I'm not here to hurt you." Thomas's breathing turned ragged. His gaze flicked to Ethan's uniform, then the badge, then back to the flashlight's glare. His voice cracked. "Taliban! You're wearing their gear. You're one of them, aren't you?" "Thomas," Ethan said firmly, kneeling slowly to appear less threatening. "You're in Colorado. You're not in Afghanistan. You're safe." Thomas shook his head violently. "Lies. They said that last time too, before they bombed the convoy, before—" He suddenly reached for something under the blanket, and Ethan instinctively braced, hand to his holster. Then the dog moved. Shadow had slipped in quietly behind Ethan and now padded forward without a sound. His steps were slow, deliberate. He passed Ethan and sat 5 feet from Thomas, not barking, not growling, just sitting, watching. Thomas locked eyes with the dog. Something flickered. The man's trembling slowed, though his hand still gripped the edge of the blanket. He blinked several times, confusion replacing fury. Shadow tilted his head gently, ears perked. For a moment, the air changed. Thomas's voice dropped. "Jasper?" His eyes glassed over. Shadow didn't respond. He only lowered himself to the floor, stretching out with a soft grunt, head on paws, breathing calm. Ethan waited, barely breathing. Thomas's eyes began to clear. "That's not him," he mumbled. "But he looks... God, he looks like him." Ethan finally stepped forward, keeping his hands visible. "What's your name?" "Thomas," the man whispered. "You've been out here a while?" A small nod. "Are you hurt?" Another nod, slower this time. Ethan scanned the room. There was a makeshift shelf made from an overturned crate. On it sat several torn photographs, water-damaged, curling at the edges. One showed a little girl, no older than 10, with 2 front teeth missing and a grin too wide for her face. Another showed a woman. Late 30s, hair in a braid, eyes tired but kind. Beside the photos was a piece of folded paper. Ethan picked it up carefully. It was a letter, the handwriting shaky and half-finished. "Dear Ellie, I'm sorry I left. I didn't know how to come back. I wanted to, I swear I did. I didn't think you'd still—" The sentence trailed off. Ethan gently set the letter back. "Your daughter?" he asked. Thomas nodded. "She's grown now, I think. Haven't seen her in 6 years." Shadow lifted his head and sniffed the air, but remained still. "I was going to send that," Thomas said suddenly. "But I tore it up. What's the point? She's better off." "No one's better off losing a father," Ethan replied. Thomas laughed bitterly. "You don't know me." "I don't have to," Ethan said. "I know pain when I see it." Thomas turned away, his voice barely audible. "It doesn't go away." "No, but you don't have to carry it alone." Silence filled the cabin again, but this time it wasn't hostile, just worn. Shadow rose slowly, walked to Thomas's side and gently rested his head against the man's knee. Thomas looked down at him, eyes rimmed with tears. He didn't speak again, but he didn't push the dog away. Thomas had fallen quiet. The air inside the cabin remained heavy with damp and wood rot, but the danger had momentarily passed. He now sat on the edge of the cot, a threadbare blanket draped over his lap, staring at nothing. His eyes, still haunted, had shifted from outright panic to a kind of quiet suspicion. Shadow lay beside the door, body curled into the draft to block the wind, but his head stayed upright, watching Thomas closely. Ethan moved carefully around the room, keeping his movements deliberate and visible. He knelt near the stove and opened the door, empty. The embers had long died. Cold metal scraped against metal as he tested the old kettle inside, only a crust of frozen residue at the bottom. "You haven't had heat in days," Ethan said aloud, half to Thomas, half to himself. Thomas didn't reply. Ethan noticed the man's hands as they rested on his knees. The knuckles were raw, pink from cold, but it wasn't just frostbite. Thin cuts lined the backs of his fingers, some scabbed, others still fresh, red against the pale skin. They were erratic, self-inflicted, signs of scraping, clawing panic reactions. He stepped closer. "Those injuries. You did them yourself?" Thomas glanced down, almost like he was seeing them for the first time. "Sometimes. When I wake up, I'm still there. I don't know what I'm doing. Sometimes I hit the wall. Sometimes it's just noise in my head." Ethan crouched near the cot but didn't sit. "You've been alone too long, Thomas." A dry laugh. "I was alone before I ever came out here." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I had a brother, worked in finance, thought joining the army made me reckless. When I got back, he said I was dangerous to be around. His kids weren't allowed near me. My wife left before the end of my second deployment. Couldn't handle the silence when I came home. Couldn't handle how I'd changed." His voice cracked, but he didn't let emotion rise. Instead, he looked toward the corner of the room where his rucksack leaned against the wall. Ellie was the only one who still sent birthday cards, but she stopped last year. I guess even daughters run out of patience. Ethan didn't speak. He let the words hang there, fill the room. Thomas wiped his nose on his sleeve. "You think I'm some poor, broken vet, out here in the woods waiting to die. But I came out here because it was the only place quiet enough for me to think, or maybe forget." "I don't think you're broken," Ethan replied. "I think you've been carrying too much alone." Thomas looked at him, something flickering behind his eyes. Then it hardened. "And you came to do what? Rescue me? Call your station and have them cart me off to a psych unit in a van?" "No." Thomas's voice sharpened. "You gonna take me back? Back to where people nod and smile and call me brave but can't wait to get away from me?" "No," Ethan said again, firm this time. "I'm not taking you anywhere you don't want to go, but you're not going to survive another night in this storm. I can get help here, but I need you to let me." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Why should I trust you?" Before Ethan could answer, Shadow rose to his feet and stepped forward. His limp was more noticeable now, likely aggravated from the cold and effort, but he stood tall, proud. He moved slowly, deliberately, and sat just at the threshold of the room, right in front of Thomas. The dog didn't beg, didn't push. He simply stared up at the man with the same quiet, unwavering presence he had shown from the start. Thomas stared back, his mouth slightly open. "This dog? He doesn't even know me." Ethan stood. "He's here anyway." A long silence passed. Then Thomas lowered his gaze. "Okay," he muttered. "Do what you need to." Ethan stepped outside and tried the radio again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. Do you copy?" Only static answered. He switched channels, tried again. Nothing. He took 2 steps uphill from the cabin, hoping for elevation. The wind had picked up since they arrived. Snow lashed sideways now, slicing through the air like shards. He tried again. "Dispatch, emergency request. I have 1 civilian located. Male, 40s, exhibiting signs of trauma, malnourishment, light injury. Coordinates." He paused, pulled out his GPS unit, tapped it for signal. The screen blinked, then gave him partial data. He relayed it into the mic. "Requesting immediate medical evac ground or air. Weather dependent. Do you copy?" A crackle, then silence. The storm was getting worse. Ethan returned inside, brushing snow off his shoulders. "No signal. I'll keep trying, but for now, we stay warm." He knelt at the stove again, began setting a fire with leftover kindling and a flare stick from his pack. Minutes later, flames flickered to life, casting a soft orange glow across the room. Thomas had laid back on the cot, one hand over his eyes. Shadow lay near the stove now, his body curved close to the heat, though his eyes still tracked every movement from Thomas. "You should name him," Ethan said casually. Thomas looked over. He yours?" Ethan shook his head. "He found me on the road, led me here." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe he was sent." Ethan didn't answer, but he smiled slightly. Shadow raised his head for a moment, ears alert, then let it rest again. The blizzard raged on, relentless and cruel, as if the mountain itself had a score to settle with the world below. Snow pelted against the fragile roof of the cabin, seeping through the edges like cold fingers trying to claw their way in. The wind howled through the broken window panes, rattling the wooden walls with a sound that echoed like distant artillery fire. Inside the dim cabin, a single lantern flickered on the table, its flame struggling against drafts of wind that crept through every crack. The temperature dropped steadily, but it wasn't the cold that made Ethan Rhodes feel tense. It was the man lying on the cot near the fireplace. Thomas Hale, the 42-year-old veteran with a build once broad and strong but now weathered and lean from years of isolation, lay wrapped in a tattered wool blanket. His breathing had grown irregular. His gray eyes haunted things that looked like they'd seen too much and remembered too little twitched beneath half-closed lids. His brow was slick with sweat despite the chill. Ethan had seen this before. PTSD wasn't just a memory, it was a live wire. He knelt near the fireplace, quietly stoking the fire with what little dry wood he had scavenged. The flames offered more than warmth now. They were a barrier against the creeping madness in the room. Shadow lay curled at the foot of the cot, his sable coat rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. The dog's left ear remained permanently folded, and his hind leg bore the faint twitch of an old injury. His eyes, deep pools of amber, watched Thomas constantly alert but calm. He knew. Somehow, he always knew. Without warning, Thomas sat bolt upright, eyes wide, arms flailing. His voice tore through the silence like a bullet. "They're coming! Get down! Get down!" he screamed, hands clawing for a weapon that wasn't there. Ethan reacted on instinct, rising to calm him, but Thomas moved faster than a man in his state should have. He lunged forward, grabbing Ethan by the collar and slamming him against the wall with surprising strength. "You're one of them! You set us up! You left us to die!" Ethan's heart pounded. "Thomas, listen to me. You're not there anymore. It's over. You're safe. You're in Aspen Ridge." But Thomas couldn't hear him. His pupils were blown wide, sweat dripping down his temple, fists clenched. His forearm pressed against Ethan's throat, cutting off air. Then, like a ghost moving through the mist, Shadow stood. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. Instead, he stepped between them, wedging his body into the narrow space and placing his head gently against Thomas's chest. The dog released a soft whimper. Not a sound of pain, but of empathy, as if echoing something broken inside the man. Thomas froze. His hands trembled. The fog in his mind cracked. Just a little. "Diesel," he whispered, voice shaking. Shadow looked up at him, still and silent. There was something in his gaze, recognition, perhaps, or merely the reflection of a memory that had once saved a life. Thomas's knees gave out, and he collapsed to the floor, cradling his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered, over and over again. "I thought you were... I didn't mean to." Ethan slowly stepped forward, rubbing his throat, still catching his breath. He crouched beside the man. "You're not alone," he said gently. "Not anymore." Shadow remained between them, his body the only warmth Thomas allowed near. For the next hour, silence reigned. Outside, the storm howled, burying the forest under inches of snow. Inside, warmth returned, not from the fire alone, but from the quiet miracle of a dog's unwavering presence. Later that night, Ethan sat across the room, blanket around his shoulders, watching the fire. His eyes drifted to Shadow, who was now lying beside Thomas's cot again. The dog's breathing was slow, even. Ethan studied him, trying to place it, the precise moment something had shifted in him. The way the dog moved, understood, connected. It wasn't just instinct. And then, a memory returned. A battlefield in Kandahar. Sand, smoke, and screaming. A moment when a soldier pinned under gunfire had been saved, dragged, shielded by a canine dog bearing the same sable coat, the same bent ear. Could it be? Ethan murmured. He hadn't seen that dog again after that day. The unit had scattered, the records lost. Could Shadow be the same dog? Could fate be so cruel and kind at the same time? He made a silent vow to find out. As the blizzard outside buried the past beneath fresh snow, something thawed inside Thomas. He had not spoken again, but his body was no longer clenched in fear. His sleep came easier, his breath even. And Shadow? He slept lightly, ears flicking at every creak, guarding not just the door, but the man's fragile return from the edge. The storm had passed. Dawn crept gently over the frostbitten treetops of Aspen Ridge, painting the snow in hues of peach and silver. Inside the cabin, the fire had long since died down to embers, but warmth lingered. Not from the heat, but from the fragile, hard-won trust that now held the three souls within its wooden walls together. Ethan stirred first. His back ached from the hard floor, but his mind was sharp. Across from him, Thomas sat on the edge of the cot, hunched forward, eyes unfocused. The old soldier looked years older than he had the night before, as if surviving one more night of memories had cost him dearly. Shadow lay curled by the door, chest slowly rising and falling, ears twitching at distant sounds, or maybe ghosts. Ethan checked his radio again. Static. Then a burst of garbled chatter. He stepped outside, raising the antenna higher. "This is Officer Ethan Rhodes. I need immediate extraction. Coordinates sent via last ping. One injured civilian, PTSD episode, unstable but nonviolent." A pause. Then, "Copy that, officer. Chopper en route. ETA 20 minutes. He exhaled and glanced back toward the cabin. It would be over soon. But what happened after? Back inside, Thomas had finally spoken. "You're going to take me in, aren't you?" His voice was hoarse, not from sleep, but from fear. Ethan shook his head. "Not like you think." Thomas's fingers picked at a frayed seam on his sleeve. "They always say that. Then you wake up in a room with no locks because they don't need 'em. The doors just don't open." "I'm not here to lock you away," Ethan said, kneeling beside him, "but you need help. Real help." "I had help once," Thomas muttered. "Then Diesel died in my arms, and they handed me pills and left me alone with the silence." Shadow lifted his head at the name. His ears perked, especially the bent one, and he let out a quiet, low whine. He stood up and padded over to Thomas, slowly, tail down, eyes steady. Thomas stared at him. "Jasper?" he whispered. "Is that you, boy?" The name hung in the air like smoke. Ethan frowned. "You called him Jasper last night, too. That his name?" Thomas didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked onto the dog's. "No, Jasper was mine, back in Kandahar. He was smart, brave. And when the bomb hit our convoy, he came back for me, dragged me out by the vest, then he went back for the others, and didn't come out." Shadow placed his head on Thomas's knee. Not out of training, out of something deeper. Recognition. Memory. A tether neither man fully understood. Ethan stepped back, slowly connecting the dots. The precision. The way Shadow responded to commands even Ethan hadn't spoken aloud. The scar pattern on his leg. The old tactical behaviors. This wasn't a stray. Outside, the distant thump of rotor blades echoed across the valley. As the sound grew louder, a red and black rescue chopper hovered into view. Snow whipped in spirals as it descended. The door slid open, and two figures jumped out, bundled in winter gear with rescue patches on their shoulders. One of them, a broad-chested man in his 50s with grizzled eyebrows and a no-nonsense gait, knelt when he saw the dog. "Wait a damn minute," he muttered, pulling off his glove. "I know this dog." Thomas tensed. "Don't take him. He's mine." The man looked up. "You sure about that? Because unless I'm seeing ghosts, this here's Bravo 3. Went missing 2 years ago in a shootout upstate. Real name, Diesel. K-9 unit out of Grand Junction." Ethan turned to Thomas, stunned. "Thomas? This dog?" Thomas's jaw clenched. His breathing grew shallow. No, you're wrong. His name is Jasper." "Sir," the rescuer said gently, "I trained this dog myself." Diesel and I did 10 busts together before he was assigned to patrol. Everyone thought he died after that ambush. But this is him, that bent ear, the silver stripe. The scar on the right hind leg? He pulled a handler out from a burning trailer and got torn up bad. Shadow didn't move. He simply looked between the two men, tail still, eyes calm. Ethan knelt beside Thomas. I think he found you because you were broken like him. You needed each other." Thomas didn't speak. His hand rested on the dog's back now, trembling slightly. "I'm not taking him from you," Ethan said, "but I think it's time we stop calling him a ghost." Shadow, Diesel, looked up and let out a sharp bark, a single, clear sound that pierced the silence like morning light. The rescuer stepped back. "We'll report him found. But if he's got a home now, maybe that's where he's supposed to be." Thomas looked up slowly, eyes misted. Then, "Let him stay." Ethan nodded. The snow fell softly now. The storm was gone, but something deeper had broken too. Not just the sky, but the past. And in its place, a quiet promise was made between men, forged not with words, but with loyalty, survival, and the bark of a dog who remembered everything. The snow had melted into gentle patches of slush as winter reluctantly gave way to early spring in the outskirts of Denver. At the Rocky Mountain Veteran Recovery Center, a facility tucked between pine groves and red sandstone cliffs, the silence was peaceful, not haunting. It was a different kind of silence from the one in the cabin. Here, it was filled with birdsong, the hum of warm coffee machines, and soft footsteps on polished floors. A silence that allowed healing to grow. Thomas Hale, now shaved and dressed in a gray sweatshirt and loose tan slacks, sat by the wide window that overlooked the garden. The 42-year-old veteran still bore the weary hollows beneath his eyes and the tension in his shoulders, but something had shifted. He no longer flinched at every sound, nor scanned the corners of the room for invisible enemies. Instead, he held a sketch pad on his lap, a charcoal pencil gliding steadily across the paper. His hands, though marked with fading scars, moved with purpose. Beside him, lying quietly with her head resting near Thomas's boot, was Shadow, now more alert, healthier, and finally fed. The 10-year-old German Shepherd, sable coat patched with silver and a bent ear that never quite stood, had become an honorary resident at the center. Though technically still unidentified officially, everyone had stopped questioning why she wouldn't leave Thomas's side. She was simply there, as steady as a metronome, as soothing as a hymn. Ethan Rhodes had made good on his promise. The 35-year-old officer continued his patrol shifts in Aspen Ridge, but every few days he drove down to Denver in civilian clothes, bringing hot coffee, quiet conversation, and news from the mountains. His presence remained calm and dependable, like a younger brother who had taken on the role of protector without ever announcing it. During one of his visits, Ethan brought with him a portfolio folder. He handed it silently to Thomas, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Inside were photograph snapshots taken by the rescue team the day they arrived. In one of them, Shadow stood between Thomas and Ethan, body slightly forward, ears alert, as if protecting them both. "They said her chip was damaged, but one of the rookies at the precinct thinks she's a retired canine," Ethan said, leaning against the window ledge. "They've been checking missing dog reports, trying to find a match. Her gait, her discipline, the way she guards someone trained her. She wasn't just a stray." Thomas looked down at the photo, his eyes glassing over. "I called her Jasper at first," he murmured. "My real Jasper. He died in Afghanistan, got hit by shrapnel when he lunged to shield me. I watched it happen." The pain that surfaced wasn't as raw as it had once been. Time and care had dulled its edges, but the wound still lived there. Ethan didn't reply. Instead, Shadow rose quietly, stepped forward and nudged her head beneath Thomas's arm. He exhaled slowly and let his fingers slide into her fur. "She's not Jasper," Thomas said after a long pause, "but she's something just as important." A few days later, a new visitor arrived at the center. Lily Hale, 20, stood at the reception desk with her arms tightly folded. She had her father's steel blue eyes and high cheekbones, but none of the warmth. Her brown hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, her jeans scuffed at the knees, and her canvas jacket faded from long travel. She hadn't planned to come. The message had been passed on through a friend of a friend, one who saw the story in the local news and recognized the name. She had only been 10 when Thomas left, 12 when the divorce was finalized, 15 when her mother died, and for all those years there were no phone calls, no letters, no explanations. Just a war-hardened silence that hollowed out her childhood. When she was brought to the garden, she saw him sitting on the bench, head tilted down, drawing. The dog lay beside him, and the sight of that massive, calm creature startled something in her, something warm and confusing. He looked up. Their eyes met. "Lily," he said, hoarse. He stood quickly, then stopped himself, unsure. She didn't move. "So it's true. You're alive." "I am. I didn't know how to come back." She glanced down at the sketch pad in his hand. It showed a soldier kneeling beside a German shepherd. The background was hazy, but the figures were clear, strong, familiar. She exhaled through her nose. "Mom waited, you know. Even after the papers. She kept your uniform in a box in the hallway closet, like you'd come back for it." "I was broken," Thomas whispered. "I didn't want you to see what I became. I would have preferred that to nothing." Before either of them could say more, Shadow slowly stood and walked over to Lily. She looked up at the young woman, tail still, eyes patient. Then, almost deliberately, she sat at Lily's feet. There was something deeply moving in the dog's quiet choice. Lily stared down at her, then crouched and cautiously extended her hand. Shadow leaned into it. "I don't know if you're real," Lily whispered to the dog, "but you're the first thing here that feels safe." Later that afternoon, Ethan joined them for coffee under the veranda. Thomas and Lily didn't speak much, but their silence wasn't as jagged. Lily sat next to her father while Shadow lay between them, her presence bridging the gap of years and words left unsaid. Thomas picked up the pencil again and began to draw another sketch, this time of Lily's face, calm and resolved, with Shadow beside her. "Maybe," Thomas said quietly, "I can build something again." Ethan nodded. "You already are." Spring had returned to Aspen Ridge with soft golden mornings and the scent of pine thawing after a long winter. The town, once sleepy and distant, now stirred with a quiet pride. At the edge of town stood the newly renovated Rocky Ridge Veterans Center, its wooden beams freshly painted, its windows wide open to let in the light. But what drew the most attention that day wasn't the building. It was what stood just outside it. A carved wooden statue, life-sized and remarkably detailed, captured the attention of passers-by. It was a German shepherd, sitting tall with one ear slightly bent and eyes carved to gaze into the horizon. Below its sturdy paws, a bronze plaque read, "Guardian of the Lost, in honor of those who heal and those who never gave up." Standing before it, Ethan Rhodes adjusted the collar of his crisp, dark navy dress uniform. Now 36, his hair was a little shorter, his posture a little straighter. His badge had changed too, promoted to lieutenant just 2 months prior. But his modest smile remained unchanged, the same quiet resolve in his storm-gray eyes. Beside him stood Thomas Hale, no longer the ghost who once clung to shadows. He had filled out again, his frame still lean but steadier, with healthier color in his skin. A charcoal gray suit replaced the hospital wear, and in one hand he held a sketchbook bound in worn leather. His other hand rested lightly on the shoulder of his daughter. Lily Hale, now 21, had returned to college in Boulder but visited often. She was taller now, or perhaps just stood taller, shoulders back, jaw firm, eyes no longer guarded. Her once tightly bound ponytail had been replaced by loose waves that framed her face. Forgiveness had softened her, but strength remained in her voice. And between them all stood the true guardian Shadow. She looked almost regal in the morning sun. The scars on her hind leg had faded beneath healthy fur, and her sable coat gleamed with streaks of silver. Her left ear still drooped, a charming quirk that made children smile when they visited the center. Around her neck was a new leather collar, engraved with one simple word, Shadow, a name given in passing, but one she had claimed with quiet dignity. The ceremony was brief. Local veterans, families, and townsfolk gathered, applauding the unveiling. A middle-aged woman named Margaret Vance, director of the Recovery Center, stepped up to the small podium. She wore a burgundy blazer and sensible heels, her voice warm and steady. "Shadow came to us by chance, or perhaps by providence," Margaret began. She walked out of the woods and into the lives of two men who had nearly given up. One needed to remember who he was. The other needed to be reminded that healing doesn't come from medals, but from connection. She turned slightly, her gaze softening as she looked at Thomas. "This dog is not just a symbol. She has become a living part of our therapy program. Shadow now works daily with our veterans, helping with anxiety attacks, nightmares, and loneliness. Some talk to her when they can't talk to anyone else. She doesn't need to respond. Her presence says enough." Applause followed. Ethan took the stage next, clearing his throat. "I don't usually give speeches," he began, rubbing the back of his neck, "and honestly, if anyone deserves the credit, it's not me." He gestured toward Shadow, who sat obediently at Thomas's feet. Des feet, eyes calm. "This girl led me through a snowstorm, into a cabin where a man was drowning in memories. She stood between us when things could have gone wrong. She didn't bark, didn't attack. She simply waited, and because of that patience, a man came back to life." He looked at Thomas and Lily. "She gave us more than safety. She gave us family again." After the applause faded and the formalities ended, people milled around the statue. Children petted Shadow gently, and veterans placed small flags at the base. A man in a wheelchair handed Thomas a folded drawing of Shadow standing in front of a mountain range, eyes shining like stars. Later that afternoon, the group moved indoors for coffee and stories. In the therapy lounge, where large windows opened to the garden, Thomas sat with Lily, flipping through his newest sketches. One showed a row of canines in uniform. Another, a softer one, depicted Shadow curled beside a young man with a prosthetic leg, eyes closed in peace. "I'm thinking of turning these into a children's book," Thomas murmured, almost shyly. "Stories of dogs who save people, not through force, but through love." Lily smiled. "You should. Kids need that kind of truth." Meanwhile, Ethan stood by the front desk, chatting with Margaret. "You know," she said, sipping her tea, "we received a call from a precinct in Wyoming. Apparently their canine unit lost a dog nearly 3 years ago, disappeared during a drug bust gone wrong. Her name was Diesel." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "They think Shadow might be her. The microchip was damaged in the incident, but her training, gait, and markings all match. One of their old officers sent us photos. It's almost certain." He turned to glance at Shadow through the window, who now lay with her head in Lily's lap. "If that's true, then she's done 2 tours in 2 different wars," he said softly. "One with a badge, and one in the shadows." "Do you want to send her back?" Margaret asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then he shook his head. "She's already home." That night, after the crowds dispersed, Thomas, Lily, and Ethan returned to the statue once more. No fanfare now, just quiet reflection. Thomas knelt beside Shadow and ran a hand over her neck. "You were never just Jasper," he whispered. "But I think you knew he was part of me, and maybe that's why you stayed." Shadow pressed her nose to his chest, tail thumping once. Ethan looked at the plaque one last time, then turned to walk back toward his truck, keys jingling in hand. Shadow trotted after him, paused, and looked back as if to ask if they were coming too, and they did. Together. Sometimes the most broken among us become the greatest healers. Shadow, a lost soul herself, became the bridge between a wounded father, a forgotten veteran, and a fractured town. It was no coincidence. It was grace. Perhaps in the silence of the snowstorm, God whispered through her pause. Perhaps miracles don't always come with thunder, but with soft fur, loyal eyes, and the quiet act of staying. In our daily lives, we often overlook small signs of hope, a kind word, a loyal friend, or a moment of stillness. But maybe, like Shadow, those are the very vessels through which healing begins. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs light. Leave a comment to honor those who serve, those who suffer in silence, and those who stand by them, whether human or four-legged. Subscribe for more stories of faith, love, and second chances. And if you believe that God still works through the unexpected, type Amen in the comments. May He bless you with peace, healing, and the courage to never give up.